Okay, so hi, gentlemen and ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Israel Industry 4.0 Leaders Summit. Thank you all for joining us. I want to do a quick lineup of our participants in this panel. Let's start with Will.
Yes, thank you, Gila. This is Will Huang. I'm in charge of business development at Waving Communications. Waving is a system integrator based in Taiwan. In this year, 2020, we have built quite a few 5G private networks. Among them, there's a special one, which is the one we built for Inventec, because it's the world's first fully virtualized all-RAN standalone 5G private network. I'm glad to be here to share with you about this project and in the upcoming hour. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us. I know it's a bit late already on your time zone. I want to also introduce Stefan from joining us from Germany.
Yeah, thanks, Shachar. I'm Stefan Weichselbaum. I'm working at Seven Principles. We are a system integrator as well, working in Germany and planning, building, and running private mobile networks there. And this also includes edge cloud implementations. And I'm very delighted to join the panel for today. Thank you.
Thank you. Joining us from Israel, Agmon. Want to say a few words? No, Agmon, we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
So I'm coming from a company called Hamlet. We're one of the leading metal processing companies here in Israel. So we are a manufacturer of valves and fittings for industrial use, but I'm running an innovation lab. It's a license incubator from the government that allows us to invest also in startups in Industry 4.0. So we invest in any startup that can be integrated either in our facility, our products, or in our manufacturing. I constantly see startups in this field, but I also see the manufacturing side and some of the needs in many of the factories here in Israel.
Excellent. So we have the integrators part, we have the use case part, and I just realized I didn't introduce myself. I am Shachar. I'm VP Operations for ASOX. ASOX is currently the world leader in technology of 5G private networks. And joining in this panel is Gilad, who is ASOX CEO. So I'll let Gilad introduce himself.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for making the effort to join us in a digital manner. Hopefully next year we will all be meeting face-to-face. As Shachar has said, I am Gilad. I'm CEO of ASOX. ASOX is a 17-year-old communication company, but we're really a startup in this new exciting world of 5G and cloud and industry. And I think
Gilad, you're on mute. Yep.
One of the things that give us all pleasure in this new field is that traditional markets such as telecommunications and industry are now really at the forefront of innovation. And that's a very unusual setting for all of us. So while, traditionally, I doubt that we would even have 20 or 30 people in an industrial panel. Now it's really coming back again.
Again, thank you all for joining us. I would like to start with maybe discussing 5G and what's the importance of 5G and Industry 4.0. Now, Will, you've mentioned that we've just finished a few months ago deployment of the first 5G private network at Inventec. If you could just share with us what's your thoughts of the importance of 5G in Industry 4.0?
Sure. Well, at Wavin, we consider 5G is quite different from the previous telecommunication standards, 4G, 3G, and so on. Because 5G not just connect people, it connects things. The three features of 5G, eMBB, URLLC, MNTC, all fit in industrial customers' needs. So we think, yes, the 5G is very important for the industry 4.0. Thank you.
Yeah. Stefan, where do you see it in Germany? How does this comes? How does this turn reality?
I have a similar view to Will, and I like to compare the introduction of 5G with the introduction of the iPad by Steve Jobs a couple of years ago. So the iPad was a larger iPhone, a bit bigger, a bit brighter, a bit faster. But on the other end, it was a totally new class of device. And 5G is similar. Yes, it's a bit faster than 4G, and you can connect more devices with it. But it opens up totally new opportunities. And we do see in the market here in Germany that especially the larger corporates and the research and development organizations are starting to explore it. They are building R&D networks, research networks, labs, and to explore the new opportunities. And we are far away from having a clear idea of what we can all do with 5G. So we are just scratching on the surface by trying out the first use cases, but possibilities are virtually endless. And the bad news are we don't know them yet, but we will find out.
I think it's a good thing that we don't know it yet. No one knows.
Absolutely, it opens up opportunities.
Correct. Agmon, how do you see that coming from the user side?
It's definitely exciting in the sense of what you're saying, that we don't even know what opportunities lie ahead, just like we couldn't anticipate all the applications that existed. In the manufacturing, at least in Israel, just because also I think we're a bit behind all Israel, we don't see obviously manufacturing sites here in Israel utilizing 5G currently, but we see the need. We see hundreds of machines, for example, in our case, CNC machines that are being connected wired. So it's hundreds of cables. And the data that is being collected from all those machines is growing significantly. So supporting the increase of data movement from the central, from the ERPs and from the manufacturing programs to the machines and from the machines back has an advantage. We also see there was a lot of interest, especially now with the COVID, of companies that wanted to provide remote presence for providing remote support. Either some companies are building machines that are millions of dollars and they're sending it to a customer, and when they need to support it, it's very difficult and almost impossible to transfer teams. So the use of remote presence, zero latency, an immediate response to augmented reality or robotics, it shows promise there. But it's like apps that could be developed and people are developing them, just like there were apps and games on the phones before. So it's definitely is exciting.
Yeah, I can tell you from experience on firsthand, we see a lot of these coming in on a weekly basis. Gilad, you mind sharing how you are seeing it?
Well, I think first of all, we have a very hands-on panel here, and so sometimes we get too caught up with the hands-on. I suggest we just zoom out for 2 minutes and look at what's happening here. So traditionally, telecommunications was a build first, experience later industry, right? Where you look at the leap of faith that operators such as AT&T had to take when they built their first 1G or 2G, and then the big bets that the Vodafones of the world, buying spectrum for $100 billion in Germany, all expecting later on for consumers to buy the phones and to start using the services. And typically that leap of faith was 4 or 5 years. And in the traditional telecommunication world, that's still possible. But when you look at the enterprise world, there is no sound CFO or CEO or head of engineering or IT that is willing to build a 5G network today expecting something to happen in 4 or 5 years, right? He would probably, unless he's maybe in Germany where there's better job security, but in generally, it would be very difficult to justify.
Not even in Germany.
Not even in Germany. Yeah, maybe that would be even pushing it. But all kidding aside, the biggest challenge we have here now is this new industry is that we have a very short leash. That means we have to start showing value of these 5G investments very quickly. And that is a dramatic challenge, which is not typical to the telecommunication consumer-oriented world, right? We need to show return on investment. So unlike, again, some of the traditional telecommunication vendors, we need to come up with a few use cases quite immediately. So one of the reasons, at least, that we have wanted to join this Industry 4.0 group was that, as was mentioned by Agmon, Israel, there's very few, very candidly, very few infrastructure 5G companies in Israel. You'd probably have to stop at A or B. But there's tens or even hundreds of application, hardware and software sensors companies in Israel that have all built great technology. And when we went a year ago and we spoke with some of these companies, we said, how are you guys going to be connected to the internet? And they said, there's going to be an infrastructure player that builds it. And as we know, in a factory, if the factory owner doesn't build his own infrastructure, there is none. Operators, take Germany, for example, without naming names, folks like Deutsche Telekom, they're going to deploy 5G in the center of Frankfurt years before they will go to Regensburg or rural Germany where the factories are. So it's up to the heads of organization in these big factories to take care of infrastructure, but they also want to see the use cases. So again, very unlike the past of 2G, 3G, or even 4G, in 5G, you got to bring in the package. And this is why integrators, infrastructure players, factory accelerators, like the stuff Agmon is doing, is going to be quite essential. And yes, it will take a few years to justify the whole, but we need to bring, at least a critical mass of these applications to market in the next year, or we'll start to get negative press a year later. So we have a very tight leash here.
I think, first of all, I definitely agree with you that there are a lot of technologies that are out there that already developed to the 5G, even though there's now infrastructure. We went with a call for action with Seagate, Microsoft, Hot Mobile, and Deutsche Telekom for startups in this field. And there are, few companies that did approach. And then we saw there's a lot of companies that can modify their technologies from logistics, finding the exact location. I saw in this, some of the companies and startups are in this, in the Startup Expo of the IFO. Here I saw like Diuk, which is a location base of 10 centimeters of items, and a variety of maybe other projects that are relevant to 5G, like was said before, that we still don't notice. But suddenly location and devices and communication or streaming video and AI in the edge will come up a lot of technologies on it. Oh, one more thing. Factories themselves also are integrating into their products IoT capabilities. And obviously, if, you know, we're a valve company and we did it and we're moving our valves to have communications inside. And so obviously we're looking at how to put inside the infrastructure that it would be sufficient for years to come. So 5G is on the table. And when the, you know, people are making our tables and chairs and not only the cars, but really the day-to-day stuff that we're using or factories that are using are implementing already communication inside. And the 5G, the cellular is a great solution. So I think we'll see much more solution, not only from startups, but also from companies making stuff.
Oh, we see this on a basically on a regular basis, where the companies, the big enterprises coming in with these use cases, connecting their AGVs, connecting their inventory from countries like Taiwan and the US and Germany. Going to my next bullet is, how is this really building up in Germany, Stefan? What's the use cases you are seeing? How's the region or the business coming up?
Okay. We are seeing first use cases are coming up from the manufacturing floor, interconnecting machines and tools, for example. And we also do see that it's very important to try them out. So we have seen, for example, a company started just switching, controlling the AGVs from Wi-Fi to 5G. So they have started with Wi-Fi. They have been not very satisfied with Wi-Fi technology due to well-known circumstances, and they switched to 5G. Okay, everything went fine. And by just seeing how well this is operating, they are identifying new things, like they started to mount some sensors on the AGV, and then they have been able to do a permanent inventory of their staff, of their material, of their tools that have been on the floor when the AGV is circling around. And by the end of the research, what they have done, the AGV isn't only moving from A to B when it should be, but the AGV is moving permanent to do the inventory. And this seems to be a very popular problem, to have well enough knowledge of where the inventory is exactly located, where the location comes into play. So logistics is a very big field, not only indoor on the shop floor, but also outdoor, of course, where the advantage of 5G over Wi-Fi is even more touchable. We do see also completely different fields. For example, hospitals. Hospitals invest very much in research what 5G can do for them. Just think about glasses for mixed reality, which could enable surgeons to supply more information or to consult with a colleague during an operation. Of course, I wouldn't take 5G today for a surgeon to support during an operation, but you can start a little smaller for educating students, because modern medical education relies heavily on 3D models. So this could help as well. Modern hospitals have robots on their own, also again for logistics, but there are numerous applications in the medical field, even for
ICU.
In the rural areas where you don't have a lot of doctors, universities are experimenting with mobile 5G networks. So they put the equipment in a backpack virtually with a lot of batteries, and then they can build mobile temporary 5G networks. The same is true for emergency situations when you don't have connectivity in the place. So this just to give you an impression of the enormous bandwidth of possibilities and opportunities.
Yeah, I think we found another use case for our EVK, field hospitals. Will, I know that the Taiwan market is exploding with 5G. Personally involved in a few of these. Care to share what's going on in your market?
Okay, in Taiwan, for manufacturing sector, we typically have, we call AAA, 3 use cases: AOI, AR, and AGV. And the 3 use cases are all video related. So from our experience, we found that the first wave of the use cases are we call video as IoT sensor. Everything you need to transmit video back to your cloud server, utilizing the 5G's uplink throughput can be the killer application in this time being. As for just take Inventec project as an example. In the phase 1, they already implemented the AOI plus AI, and just launched for a couple of months. They already see quite an improvement in terms of the manufacturing efficiency and the decrease of the labor, the need for labor, both by double digits. So it's quite like actually pay off for their investment for this 5G infrastructure.
That's one hell of a statement. Agmon, care to share? How do you see the Israeli market? I know that just on a small anecdote regarding the hospitals, Gilad can elaborate later, but
we are in an industrial forum conference, Shah.
No, that's okay, but hospitality is just another type of factory. That's it.
But augmented reality is definitely, I think actually for manufacturing, it would go in sooner because of the ease of use and because of the problem that you want to solve. It's solving a big pain in the industry, preserving knowledge, saving knowledge. So augmented reality even started before the 5G, but it's extremely, it's very important for the latency and for sending the visual data and so on. So I think it's going to increase, both for educational purposes, how do I operate this machine and so on, and for remote support as well.
Is that being the use case generator rather than the market itself? Gilad, how are you seeing it?
Yes, so I think we have almost a too good to be true spread of Germany, Taiwan, and Israel. And this is not really by coincidence. If you look at the hubs of the industrial growth, in Germany and Taiwan, if you look relatively Taiwan, we have to say very openly, was relatively unaffected by COVID this year. So Taiwan was definitely a hotspot of innovation in the industrial space. But I think what also is important in these two economies is, and I don't think we're going to talk a lot today because it's not a telecommunication conference here, is the fact that their governments have allocated spectrum for the use of factories. Now, we're not going to have a bash the operator event here, but historically, highly regulated operators, sometimes even without wanting to, have always been a delaying factor in introducing cellular services to to consumers, but most importantly to enterprises. So when we look at Israel, we shouldn't talk too much about our market, and our political mayhem, but actually try to look at what are the assets that we have in Israel. And as we said, Israel has become a hub of technology for the automotive industry, for testing, for allocation, for augmented reality. So I think when you speak with Agmon, it wouldn't be fair to try to put them in the corner of what's happening in our factories, but what are the opportunities that startups and traditional companies who were minded at serving consumer-oriented applications and now want to expand into industry. And our message to them is that in this new world, it is possible. I think another point I want to kind of mention, and as you can see, my mind is a little bit all over the place because there's so many topics here, is the effect of cloud. Now, until right now, we just talked about infrastructure of 5G as a technology, but I would, again, want to hear Will and Stefan on this point. But what makes our domain, not necessarily just ASOS, but other companies, is that in 5G, unlike any other previous generation, you can actually run 5G infrastructure in a cloud setting. So folks like Amazon and Azure are now introducing edge cloud or on-premise managed cloud services in the factory floor. Mm-hmm. And now smaller and smaller application companies out of Israel that had to rely on a very long chain of approvals to get their gear distributed globally can actually leverage the power of the cloud, whether through Microsoft or Amazon, whoever may other the players be, and join forces with 5G cloud infrastructure such as ASOS. And that's really, really exciting because I can be an algorithm provider of location. I can develop my algorithm, and through the power of the cloud, I would be able to offer it to hundreds or even thousands of factories without even having a direct interaction with all these factories. And that's a great distribution way for some of Agmon's startups.
I want to strengthen what you're saying and imagine, Hamlet, we're doing valves and fittings, right? And inside Intel's fab, fabrication site, but any fabrication site, it's tens of thousands of valves and fittings. Also on an oil rig and so on. Having the ability, as you mentioned, there's the cloud, and a lot of the cloud can be migrated to a virtual cloud on premises for the customers, and companies like ourselves, but any component are a catalyzer for it, because it's like you said, it's easy for us to implement this technology inside the valve itself and the gateways and provide a private network for our customers for the communication inside of all the valves themselves with view from a distance. So definitely, I agree with you on that. Also on the startups level, startups that are implementing solutions both inside factories in Israel, which I agree, it's not that interesting. It's not a big market. And many of the startups are looking outside of Israel simply because the investors are also looking for it inside the startup, that it has customers outside of Israel. But it's a great use cases. We can use some of the companies, which many of them are medium-sized, but we have also, a mining company in Israel, and we have metal companies and process companies. Israel was very important for us for the independence along the years to build a variety of different industries, from weapons, and we try to build the cars and everything by ourselves. But we distributed it eventually, but we have a lot of core different manufacturing capabilities in Israel, even though they are very, very small compared to what is out there in the world. And startups are able to implement them. And there are a lot of pilots that are connecting machines remotely or doing obviously the AI and the data itself, in variety examples that start in Israel in a factory and then migrate to another company outside.
So Shahar, if I can take your role for 1 minute, I know that Stefan has, and both Stefan and Will have some opinions about, you know, the Azure platform or the Cloud Edge platform in general. And
absolutely, also referring to Adam's question. So the major difference between previous generations and 5G is that the network itself is a cloud application. So therefore, when deploying for a customer a network, so the first thing to deploy is a cloud. And of course, there are different options to deploy cloud. You can rely on the well-known public clouds like Azure or like AWS, or you could bring this public cloud onto your premise with AWS Outpost or Azure Stack Edge. And then you have this public cloud technology on your premise, and you run your network on this cloud on your premise, and you run your applications on your premise. And the real good news about it is that you can not only run your network on this cloud, you can also run applications out of the large ecosystems of these public cloud providers. And if you are maybe in defense or other technologies, if you are too much concerned about public clouds, then you can, of course, also deploy this on a private cloud and completely being on premise. So therefore, the big advantage of this 5G is that it's all cloud native. And as cloud native technology, you can deploy it either in the public cloud or hybrid or totally on premise, and just build big fences around it that nobody can enter your network. So these opportunities are the big advantage, and it's also not only an opportunity, it can be also a migration path. So just start small, deploy everything on the public cloud, and then as a first step, just bring the user traffic out of the cloud onto premise, which is called a hybrid deployment scenario. And then if you grow further, and by gathering new experience, exploring new use cases, then you switch your network totally to an on-premise network. So this gives you also this track of growth, which enables you to start small and to start with low investments. And as you grow, as you gather benefits out of your 5G network, especially around your edge cloud, then you invest further and move more towards your premise.
Spoken like a true 5G evangelist.
Absolutely.
So what have we learned so far about 5G from the past experience, from the past installations we already have?
So the first and major learning is try it out. Really try it out. So 5G is still an emerging technology. So it's young, and you have a lot of press announcements which tell you about 20 gigabits per second and millions of devices, and this is not yet there. It will be there in a couple of years, but for the moment, you need to try it out. And this comes back to my previous statement, based on the amazing capabilities of this technology. Start small, try out, understand where are your benefits, look around left and right, what may be additional benefits you haven't even thought about it yet, and then grow. And this is the best thing you can do.
Yes, I agree with Stefan that we have tried out. Like we wave in from the project this year that for industrial users they have pretty different demand as from the need of the consumers. Just for instance, the uplink throughput. Just as I mentioned that 5G enables the concept of video as IoT sensor. So in many use cases, the users need high throughput, multi-hundreds megahertz uplink to enable the multiple video cameras. It's not like the 4G era you watch Netflix. What you only need is downlink. That's all the operators focus. And that's echo Stefan's concept that we have to try out. If we didn't have this kind of experience, we don't know the real need for industrial users. Okay, that's one of the lessons we got here in Taiwan.
Can you tell us how was the integration between the teams? I mean, in the old world, we had the giants of the telecom world coming in and doing an end-to-end. Now with O-RAN and opening up or decoupling the hardware and the software elements, how was the work working with two teams? I know a lot of people has concerns about that.
Yeah, I think 5G, the special part of 5G is that it takes place in the era of the mature open structure systems and the virtualization. So actually, just like ASUS solutions, right? Except your radio unit, which is proprietary made by ASUS, the other things are software running on standardized servers, switches. So that's easier for the industrial users to embrace the 5G private network because they have a lower TCO, total cost of ownership. And that's one part, easier for them to embrace. Another part that it's easier, the open structure is easier for the users to fetch the data they need for for further analytics to utilize the value of the big data. So that's also one thing we witnessed in here.
An open question. I think I want Gilad to answer first, though. Where is this going? Where is this 5G for industries going? What's the future hold for us?
Well, Shachar, again, we want to be very practical for the sake of the listeners, but again, it's worth for 1 minute to step back. And one of the great things that we have in the microcosmos of a factory or a hospital, although a hospital is more regulated and has, at the end there's human beings being processed, if I dare say. But in factory, you actually have a microcosmos of 10 years from now. Because when we started out on the journey of 5G 2 or 3 years ago, the vision of autonomous cars driving the streets of San Francisco or Jerusalem was imminent, right? Everybody said 2020, 21. Now the consensus is talking about 6, 7, or even 8 years from now. But AGVs, as we just discussed, are going to be driving in factories in the next few months.
It's already driving AGVs, definitely.
Exactly.
Many factors are using AGVs. Yeah.
So the industrial world, which again has been hibernating, let's be honest, right? The SCADA networks. Now, these things have not been moving in factories for
20, 30, 40 years, is now all of a sudden finding itself in the middle of all these great technologies looking for a place to prosper. And
that's the Industry 4.0 boom, right? So just like you said, the MES and PTC, the ThingWorx, and G, which the changed, and Siemens, and everybody, fought on the cloud, on the IIoT cloud, which is now also with the 5G, just like been mentioned, it's also being migrated also both on the edge and on premises, and also on the cloud, because as AI is being integrated, a lot of the items is cleaning the data, ongoing learning to change the model. And it is really booming. And the 5G is another thing. And I think IT, VPs of ITs and so on in the future, they are thinking already on how to make their factory wireless because they need to connect it. And they are thinking, and that's infrastructure. So they are going to think ROI, how much does this system and infrastructure cost for me? But it's going to be just like any other technology that they're buying into the factory, making sure it's up to date, that it's secured, that it answers the system, and it has possibilities for the future. And the gap of the prices it's not going to be a huge gap. It's like it's not. And so I think it's going to be adapted, definitely on green fields, but also those who are going to do modifications.
Agmon, I'll tell you what. We've seen a lot of factories in the country is not represented here in the US when they are saying, okay, we just want to skip the fiber optics phase and let's just kill the cable. Let's go straight to 5G. Let's connect the production lines. Let's connect the AGVs straight out, bringing it into the 2020s. I mean, they don't want to hear about fiber optics. And in Germany, we see it as well in the legacy industry, if I may, all the Mittelstatten factories that just want to step into the future, to experience with the 5G, to connect the factory and to do some MEC computing and connecting to the ERP system and the SCADA systems locally. We see this every day, and we can really see the future. I mean, Stefan, what's going on in Germany? What do you think the market? Where do you think the market is going over there?
So we have a lot of manufacturing companies and many of these medium-sized. So they will in the first order look to the large corporates. And we already do see that the large corporates, especially the well-known German car manufacturers, are heading these initiatives. Amazingly, companies like BMW, like Audi, like Mercedes, they are now going to 3GPP standardization and put their requirements into the standardization process. We have never seen this before. And this gives us a strong and clear signal that the big corporates are heavily interested and heavily investing into this ubiquitous connectivity. And I'm truly convinced that in 5 years from now, or latest in 10 years from now, such a panel couldn't take place, because it's that common that you all have wireless connectivity in your factories that nobody wants to talk or to listen about it.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. Will, where do you see the Taiwan market going?
I think the first wave of the market is driven by the government incentives, like tax cuts and the subsidies to have the industry users to invest in 5G infrastructure. So we already have seen more and more medium-sized manufacturers start to ask about the 5G. I would say that they consider 5G, but not necessarily 5G private networks. So I think there will be split of 40%, 60%, maybe 60% of the industrial user will go for public 5G. 40% of the users will go for the private one. But I have a different thinking from yours, that I think the wireless communication is the scarce resource. So the 5G will be only used for the sensitive, especially time-sensitive data transformation. But for the others, like the just sensory networking for the environment, like the factories, just shop flow environments, they'll be used by the low power WAN or something. That's what I think.
Okay. Agmon representing our high-tech and startup nation.
Regarding like last comments, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, there are a lot of startups here, and I know there's a lot more startups that are not listed in the Startup Expo here, but they're probably in the Startup Nation Central database as well. I definitely recommend, and I notice there are a lot of also corporate venture capitals and people innovations inside those companies. I definitely recommend you to approach those startups and find a mutual pilot for them.
Thanks. This is a note for the audience. We're going to finish the session in a few minutes. So if anyone has last questions, please write them on the chat. And I will let Gilad have his final pitch.
Shachar, do you want to give people a minute to see?
Yeah, I will give them a minute. Will, I have a question here. People are asking, how long did it take to set up the Inventec setup, and what are the efficiencies generated from the change?
Say again?
How long did it take to set up Inventec?
About 7 months.
10 months. And the
second question?
What was the gain?
Okay, in the first phase, they already see the gain. We call the terminology called FPY, first pass yield, which is a crucial KPI for factories. That's been improved by more than 10%. And for labor, they already see a decrease by 50% of the labor.
That's amazing. That is amazing. We have a question from the audience. What are the regulation hurdles for Industry 4.0 5G clouds? Which country is leading it?
So maybe, Sean, maybe I will start with a very quick for some in the audience, because that question was also as it related to 4G. From the regulations which are needed inside the factory, I think we would allow Stefan and perhaps Agmon to discuss. More on the general term, if it wasn't clear, one of the key elements that is enabling this new private 5G market is the fact that governments have been proactive in trying to lower the hurdle of entry into the market. So in Germany, and Stefan can probably tell you about it, it's quite simple just to register your factory, mention its location, give a few KPIs about what you intend to do, and the cost of license is quite small. In Taiwan, it's going to be the same. In Japan, with local 5G, it's going to be the same. So in markets in which the regulator, or the UK now with its very new approach to regulation of private use, in which basically there's not even separate spectrum. There's the same spectrum which is owned by operators, but mainly because a lot of these factories are in rural areas, you just apply, they check that it doesn't interfere, and you can receive a license. So whatever the flavor of spectrum was in the countries who are going to be very successful in the short term, Germany, Taiwan, potentially Japan and the UK, these key hurdles were lowered quite dramatically. You know, a lot of eyebrows were raised when this model started. The internal regulations that have to do with the way machinery is operated of that, now, frankly, that's not my domain. Maybe we can hear the other folks in the panel about. But again, what makes the adoption of 5G private networks successful in the industrial is countries where the regulator has decided to treat the industrial use case separately from the consumer market.
Yeah, just to emphasize on that. So in Germany, there are 100 megahertz of spectrum dedicated for industrial use. This is the average what the other 4 public operators have been auctioned for. So the 2 big guys, Deutsche Telekom and Vodafone, they have got a bit more. They have 130 megahertz. The 3rd player, Telefonica, has 110, and the 4th player has just 70 megahertz. So for industrial use, for your premise, you have approximately the same amount of spectrum available like a public network operator has available for serving a whole country. So this is a tremendous resource, and you can play with it freely when you got the license, and the license hurdles, as you, Gilad, has just explained, are really low. And then you can play with it free on your premise. And this is a very, very precious resource that you can use on your own shop floor.
Yeah.
Maybe Will can talk about Taiwan as well.
Yeah, same here. In Taiwan, we have the government in the end of last year designated 100 megahertz, particularly for the industrial use, for private network actually, which is different from the spectrum used by the operators. So same here.
I think, Gilad, that also in Israel we see some sort of needle movement towards the enterprises in that term, right? I think they are more cooperative.
You know, we're a fairly small market, and we don't want to get too political in these times, but certainly, you know, under the new Minister of Communication, we have seen a much positive wind tailwind in both 5G and fiber optics backhaul in Israel. And I think that it's still possible, assuming we will ever have a solid government for more than 1 year, to get to a point where we would go in that direction. But definitely we've seen great progress in our own Ministry of Communication. You know, it used to take months, and if you even could get a trial license, and you know, right now the Ministry of Communication here in Israel is committing to about 2 weeks lead time. So definitely we should not give up also on our own internal market in terms of opening up spectrum for the industrial use. Right? We just need to have a little bit more stability. But I guess this is a topic for another panel.
Yeah. So guys, I think we're out of time. Yeah. I want to thank you all for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And here's to 5G.
Yes.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.